Welcome to Learning Thursdays. I'm Dean Hale with the OASAS Learning and Development Unit and your host for today's presentation. Today's presentation is titled, How We Can Identify, Support, and Prevent Trafficked Youth, Awareness and Knowledge. And our presenter is Christine Anderson, Anti-Trafficking and Runaway and Homeless Youth Coordinator, Division of Youth Development and Partnerships for Success, from New York State Office of Children and Family Services. She'll be joining us in just a moment. First, a word about Learning Thursdays. Learning Thursdays are offered to behavioral health professionals as a free learning opportunity with the goal of improving the knowledge and skills of the New York State substance use disorder workforce as we strive to improve the lives of individuals needing prevention, treatment, and recovery services. A goal of Learning Thursdays is to support the professional development of the treatment, prevention, and recovery workforce. We do this by offering regular presentations that are relevant to today's substance use disorder treatment professional. As always, if there are any questions, comments, or suggestions, please feel free to contact us at the Learning Thursdays mailbox. You can use the same mailbox to express an interest in providing a future Learning Thursdays. And now it's time to start the presentation and welcome our presenter.
Hello, everyone. In case you're not taking this in the morning, my name is Christine Anderson. As Dean said, I work for the Office of Children and Family Services in Rensselaer, New York. In my role, one of the biggest jobs that I have is I am our anti-trafficking statewide coordinator. And with that, I am the statewide coordinator for our Safe Harbor New York program, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And what we do is we work on awareness, prevention, training, and technical assistance in regards to the human trafficking of young people, as well as the commercial sexual exploitation of children. And we'll delve into what all of that means in just a moment. So I want to thank OASAS for having me here today and thank all of you for taking the time to participate in this Learning Thursday. So today, as we said, we're going to be doing a very general overview onto CSEC. And again, that stands for the commercial sexual exploitation of children and trafficked youth. So some of the things I think we're going to talk about today are how to identify those young people as victims, and we'll talk more about that terminology in a moment. Identify red flags and vulnerabilities that make young people susceptible to these crimes, as well as we're going to talk about ways to engage with survivors and what that trauma may or may not look like in young people. What I'd like you to do real quickly is to take out a small piece of paper or a scrap piece or a Post-it, or if you have other people in the room, take a few minutes and write down how you would describe a teen prostitute. What adjectives come to mind? What images do you think of? What concepts? So what are some of those things that come to mind when someone says to you, teen prostitute? So just take a minute, brainstorm those things, a couple of moments. Some of the things we normally hear are scantily clad, provocative, promiscuous. We hear words like slutty, drug addict, walking the streets, getting into cars with strangers. Things like that are what often come to mind when people think of the word or words teen prostitute. Now I'd like you to do the same activity, but do it for hearing the words trafficked youth. So what images come to mind? What adjectives? What feelings? What behaviors do you think about? Where do those young people come from? What do they look like? If you hear the words trafficked youth, we often hear the words suffering, pain, dirty. We often hear things like chains and like bindings, which is not necessarily the truth, but based on media perception, that's not abnormal. Forced. What do you think of? And the reason we're doing these exercises is because the language we use when we're working with these young people is immensely important. So one thing I want to stress is in the legal world and in the world of trafficking, there is no such thing as a teen prostitute because minors are not able to consent to that no matter what. So there is no such thing as a teen prostitute, right? When you think of words like teen prostitute, you think of choice. You think of someone who's doing something because they want to, whereas a trafficked youth is doing something that they may not want to do, but because they feel like they have to do. In the world of trafficking and CSAC, we do not use the word victim unless we are working with the legal system and law enforcement. We use the word survivor. And the reason for that is survivor has a sense of empowerment to it, right? Victim means they don't have any power, they have no choice. But when we use the word survivor, we think of all the things they've dealt with and overcome to get to this point. We also make sure we don't use a rescue mentality. It is not our job to save young people who are in what we refer to as the life. It is our job to support them as experts in their own life and help them make the best choices possible so they can live the kind of life they want to live, whatever that looks like. When we talk about best practices later, those of you who work with folks who are in recovery or have a history of substance misuse, much of this will sound familiar because we always approach working with survivors from a harm reduction and risk tolerance standpoint, meaning that is really our goal to meet them where they are at in that moment. You can't force someone to change if they're not ready for it. All you can do is provide them with support and resources to help them make the best choices for them in that moment, as they are the experts in their own life. Okay, so this is just a really great flow chart. New York State was one of the first, actually it was the first state in the nation when we enacted the Safe Harbor for Exploited Children Act to recognize that minors who participate in all of these things that are on the right-hand screen are actually victims of a crime, as they are not able to consent. And those fall under child sex abuse claims. So it might be a young person who's stripping, who is giving massages, erotic massages, participating in child pornography, sending explicit images to an older adult, or who is engaging in sex acts for either money or goods. And those all fall under CSEC. But what is trafficking exactly? Just so you have an actual definition. Trafficking is when a person engages in sex or labor services for the benefits of someone else because of force, fraud, or coercion. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. So these are the three elements that are in the legal definition of trafficking. What's unique about trafficking is that the young person, the survivor, may not actually feel like they're being trafficked. They may not see those elements of force, fraud, or coercion. But as professionals, we know what they are. So I'm just going to talk to you really quickly about some examples of the three. Force is the most, I think, well-known or easy to understand one. It doesn't need to be physical. It is any way in which one person controls another. So it might be taking away their legal documents. It might be food deprivation. It might be that you'll only provide them a place to live if they do X, Y, and Z. So it doesn't necessarily have to be physical force. The exploiter or the trafficker doesn't actually have to physically harm or put their hands on the survivor for force to be an element that's part of their trafficking. So that's just something to keep in mind. Fraud is also fairly easy to notice and understand. So that's just tricking people into doing something you want them to do. And it might be giving them false promises of employment. It might be making them believe they're in a relationship with you, even though you actually don't care about them at all. Anything along that line that involves deception. Now, coercion is the tricky one. It's the hardest to detect, and it is often the hardest to prove. But it can involve things like blackmail, threats not only to your safety, but the safety of the people you love. For example, we had a young person who had been trafficked and they continued to stay in the life because their trafficker had threatened to coerce her younger sister into the life if she didn't keep continuing to do what the trafficker wanted her to do. So it doesn't have to be anything like physical. It doesn't have to be blatant. It's if you don't do this, I'm going to send everyone the pictures you sent me on the internet of you naked. Um, Things like that. So those are just the three main elements that are involved in trafficking to meet the legal definition. These are just some statistics for you. Now, these are a little old. They are from 2014, so I know that they are probably a little out of date. If you are looking for more numbers that are more recent and or specific to a certain area of New York State in which you live, if you go to the OCFS website on the Human Trafficking Safe Harbor page, we have data from up through 2020 that breaks this demographics information we get from our Safe Harbor programs by county, region, if the young person is involved in child welfare or juvenile justice. All the demographic information that we get from our counties is found there. So feel free to check that out. Okay, so as you can see on the screen, anyone can be a trafficker. In this bubble is just things we have seen or our providers have seen in the communities of adults who have trafficked young people or young people who have trafficked other young people. As you can see that nobody is immune from this, right? Family members traffic other family members. You'll see employers that tends to be more labor trafficking, professional athletes, romantic partners, business owners. It really is an inclusive list. So if you see or don't see something on there that is missing, please reach out and let us know. We can add it to our little bubble. But that just gives you the perspective that it is not always what you see on the media. Now, on the flip side of that, what does a survivor look like? And it's a very similar bubble in that everybody could be a survivor of trafficking. Males, females, gay, straight, gender non-conforming, binary. You can be white, you could be African American, you could be Hispanic, you can be rich, you can be poor. There is nothing that discriminates in trafficking or CSEC. So that's just something we really want to drive home, because we have heard things like they don't look like a trafficked person. Well, what does a trafficked person look like? Because anybody could be one. We found this statistic to be kind of startling. So we found that it was so important, as there is such a misconception that trafficking and sexual exploitation only happens to females. But we know that 45% of trafficking cases and CSEC cases involve males. That's a staggering number. I think that if you ask someone in the general population, they would probably say, oh, like 10%. No, it's 45%. Many of these young men are trafficked because they're homeless. So they're doing what they have to do to survive. So not all. That's just an example. So it's just something to keep in mind, that it is a misconception. You may be familiar with the genderbread person. Now there's actually a gender unicorn, I think, that explains gender identity and sexuality. And we always bring this up because we think it's so important to remember that LGBTQ plus young people are significantly more vulnerable to CSAC and trafficking than heterosexual peers. However, they are less likely to access services for a variety of reasons. They may not be out yet. They may have shame and stigma attached to either their sexuality or the acts that they have had to partake in. And something else we also like people to keep in mind when working with young people who are survivors or at risk is that gender and sexuality are two very different things, and they are not mutually exclusive. So the example I like to give is just because a young man engages in sexual acts with another young man because they're being trafficked or they're having survival sex doesn't necessarily mean that that young man is gay. Could he be? Yes. Does it mean he is? No. So it's just very important to keep that in mind, that those two things are not mutually exclusive. As I stated earlier, we work with young people. So if you're looking at this list on the screen, you know, they have this desire to be in these romantic relationships. They feel insecure. They're figuring out who they are. They're living in a world that is so new to them. They don't feel valued. They want freedom. They love attention. They test boundaries. Who is this list describing to you? Teenagers, right? Young people. Our work focuses on young people ages, we always say 0, but primarily we're talking about 12 to 21. So these people, because they're in such a stage of transition in their life, are significantly vulnerable to exploitation and trafficking. And so what are some things we could be on the lookout for when we're working with young people? So we call these the red flags of child trafficking. There's quite an extensive list. We're not going to talk about all of them today just because it would take forever. And a caveat I want to say is that just because a young person exhibits these red flags or has these vulnerabilities, it doesn't necessarily mean that they will become a survivor. It means they're more susceptible. And just because they don't have any of these things doesn't mean they aren't a survivor, if that makes sense. So some of the things that we look for is involvement in child welfare or juvenile justice. Those young people are just more susceptible for a variety of reasons. Branding or tattoos that look unusual. We have seen tattoos and brands of things that look like barcodes. We have seen tattoos that symbolize certain things. If they frequently run away from either their home or their placement or their family, if they show up with expensive shoes or clothing or a phone or money that they can't really or don't want to explain where they got it from, also a red flag. If they have significantly older partners and or friends, it could be a red flag. If they're reluctant to say where they were or what they've been doing, could be a red flag. If they exhibit or end up having multiple STIs or they have them frequently, if they're significantly younger and they're using slang terms for sexual acts, all of these things and others are things to be looking out for, as they are possible red flags to a young person who has been trafficked or is at high risk of being trafficked or being exploited. So just some things to look out for and keep in the back of your mind when working with young people. So there are 4 main types of child sex trafficking. The first is family, and these are pretty self-explanatory, but this is a family member exploiting or trafficking another family member. It might be a parent or a guardian exploiting their young person in exchange for not having to pay rent or drug money. I think the pimp type is probably what people most think about when they think about trafficking, and that is the normal pimp relationship. Gang members traffic as initiation tactics, as well as in order to stay in the gang. And then there's survival sex. And this is the one that I find people find the most hard to grasp, because they feel like, well, if the young person is doing it willingly and consensually, is it really trafficking? Yes, because the person who is receiving the sexual act from them is giving them something in return, whether it's a roof over their head, food, drugs, money, what have you, that's survival sex. If we could provide that young person with housing, food, methadone, and these are just examples, and the services that they really need or the resources they need, and they didn't have to engage in the sex act or the exploitative act to get those things, they would not most likely engage in that relationship. This is the same type of breakdown, but for labor trafficking. So our work at OCFS is primarily focused on sex trafficking, but we are starting to delve a little more into the labor trafficking world. So again, some of them are similar. The family sending their kids to work so they have a place to stay, a contractor exploiting people so they get cheap or free labor, and then withholding their visas or their IDs. A landlord, hey, you can live here, but you have to work for me for, 14 hours a day. We see a lot of domestic workers and industry-funded aid groups. So how do young people get involved? So traffickers recruit young people in a variety of ways. The recruitment tends to involve the fraud, like giving them a promise, like, hey, if you do this, I'll do this for you, and you can make millions of dollars, and you could be a model, or you could be an actress, or no one will love you like I do, et cetera, et cetera. And once they get that, they then have control, and the control then turns it into force or coercion. We have seen quite a trend in traffickers recruiting via social media through Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, gaming services is coming up a lot, that they'll hop on a game, and I'm sorry, I'm not super familiar with the gaming world, but they'll start a chat with a young person and build this relationship and bond with them in order to traffic them in a variety of ways. The other thing that we have seen is young people trafficking each other. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean they're doing it intentionally or willingly. Sometimes a trafficker will recruit young people and then use those young people to recruit other young people and say things like, well, if you get a new girl, then you're free to go. So they do it for their own safety or because they're being told they have to. So it happens in a variety of ways. They really play into those insecurities and vulnerabilities that young people have just by being teenagers, or if they come from maybe a disruptive family life or home life, or if they're homeless or feeling kind of lost in who they are. So they just prey on those vulnerabilities. But there is a lot of work being done in educating young people about grooming tactics and things to look out for and online safety. So we are making a lot of headway. One of the things we hear so often is, well, why doesn't that young person just leave? It's very similar to the trauma bond that survivors of domestic violence experience, right? They have this bond with this person, or they feel like they don't have anywhere to go if they do leave. What are they going to do? Maybe this person is the only person in their life who has provided a roof over their head and food for them to eat and clothing for them. And if they leave, who do they have? What do they have? It might be nobody. So they feel stuck, and this is their best option. The other thing is, often they have relationships with their trafficker prior to the trafficking occurring. So we see this often if it is their romantic partner or if it is a family member. It's really hard to break that bond and to walk away from that. So I always encourage people when they say, well, why don't they leave? To really think about the relationship that that young person has with that person, maybe outside of the trafficking or prior to the trafficking. That bond exists, and it's very difficult to break. So what is trauma? Trauma is what overwhelms and disrupts our ability to use normal coping mechanisms, right? To adapt. So we give a really good example of trauma. So if, let's say, two people are at the mall, very normative experience, and a guy runs through and he's streaking. How somebody reacts to that incident could be completely different based on if they have had a traumatic experience. Some of us may just like look shocked and seem surprised and kind of like roll our eyes and brush it off. Other people who have exhibited sexual trauma or who have been exploited or any kind of trauma may completely shut down after that because they don't know how to cope in that moment. And that's just a broad example. But in order to work with young people who have had some kind of traumatic experience, no matter what it is, you really need to be cognizant and understanding of what trauma is and how it exhibits itself. So what are some ways that trauma shows itself in their behavior? So we're going to do another one of those little exercises where you have your little piece of paper or you're sharing with a partner or a coworker. What are some ways that you might see trauma indicated in a young person or in a person in general? So what are some ways that might, or things that might show you this person has experienced or is experiencing trauma right now in their life? Things we hear are withdrawal, inattentiveness, hyperactivity, overly clingy. So maybe they were very distant and now they're clinging and that's going back and forth. Significant changes in their behavior. Somebody who was once an extrovert and loved going out and was the life of the party and super funny and chatty has now become sort of a hermit and a recluse and doesn't want to go out. Changes in the way they dress. Either way, they may all of a sudden start to wear big, baggy, oversized clothes, minus the fact that maybe that's what the style is at the time. Or they may start to dress more scantily clad with more revealing clothing. They may daydream a lot. They may burst into tears for what you think is no reason. It could be a variety of things, but these are things to look out for when you're working with young people. Just any kind of unique change in their behavior that can't be explained, I guess I would say, that tips you off that maybe something happened. So I like to put this slide in our presentations because we often hear, well, why doesn't the young person ask for help? Well, why are they doing this? Can't they just call the cops or can't they just, go to therapy or go to the hospital? These are some actual quotations from people who work with young people as well as law enforcement in regards to working with young people who have been exploited or trafficking. If she doesn't care, why should I? They're not going to change. They're a criminal. We'll help you this time, but next time, don't be so stupid. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. They don't want our help. Unless you were chained to a bed, there's nothing we can do. So when young people are hearing these things from the adults who are supposed to help them, if this is what you're hearing, why would you continue to go to those people for help? Right? Like, you wouldn't. On the flip side of that, these are some quotations we've actually received from young people about the system. And when we say the system, we're referring to the system in general. So we're talking about a plethora of people. So it could be law enforcement, it could be service providers and caseworkers, it could be the local county, it could be mental health professionals or folks at hospitals. Any adult that they've interacted who is supposed to have a position of service to them could have said something like this. So nobody cares. It's my fault. If I tell, they're going to take me away. You don't actually want to help me. You're just doing this because it's your job. If I tell the truth, I'm going to be punished. Many of them have been told that what they're doing is illegal. So if they try to turn somebody else in, they're going to get arrested. So it's really hard for them to reach out and get assistance when there is these types of feelings involved, as well as reactions from the adults who are supposed to be helping them. So how do we fix that? It's our role to challenge all of those beliefs, right? So any moment with a young person, and I imagine this is similar in the world of recovery, is successful if they feel safer, accepted, and understood. That means you have provided trauma-informed care and worked with that young person, and met them where they're at in that moment. It is really those little moments and those little victories that mean the most. Maybe they made all their appointments that week. Maybe they showed up on time to see their caseworker. Maybe that instead of running, they called someone for help. Maybe they went to the food bank instead of having sex for money to get food. All of those are little moments and little victories that we need to be encouraging and sharing our pride for and saying, I'm so proud of you that you did that. You made such a great choice. What will happen if you do it again? So it really is about those little moments and little victories. But in having these conversations with young people, we need to be clear about our role also on the flip side of that. And that is understanding where our boundaries lie. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Some of us have personal boundaries on things that we are comfortable discussing and things we're comfortable sharing and doing, as well as our professional boundaries. What are you allowed to do by your employer? What is the protocol and procedures you need to follow about services you can provide, conversations you can have, things you can share? So I encourage you to find out what those professional boundaries are and really think about where your personal boundaries lie. Because young people will often say things to you to try to shock you and to try to see how you'll react. So understanding how to handle those conversations and where your comfort level is exceptionally important. So, for example, if a young person comes to you and they want to talk about oral sex and it's just not something that is something you're feeling like you can actually talk to them about in a way that is respectful, understanding, and educational, the best thing you can do is say, I don't think I'm the right person to talk to you about this, but I'm happy to help you find the right person who could help you. So you're not saying, whoa, 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 I'm not talking to you about that. That's inappropriate. You're acknowledging that they have questions or that they have something they want to share, and you're going to work with them to find a person who's comfortable having those conversations. If the boundary is professional, again, be transparent, be honest. Say, unfortunately, I'm not allowed to talk about that because of my job here. But again, I can help you find someone who can. So it's really clear that you are not dismissing them. You are acknowledging their feelings and their need for information or need to discuss something. And if you're not the person to talk to them about this, you are happy to help them find somebody who can. Other things to keep in mind when you're talking with these young people. I think one of the most important things we can do is thank them for choosing us to have these difficult conversations with. It says a lot about who you are as a professional if somebody chooses to engage with you in these very difficult conversations. So just to thanking them and saying, I feel so proud that you feel like you can come talk to me about this, and actually be sincere about it. Practice your poker face. Young people are experts at reading our body language. So if you roll your eyes or you're fidgeting or your body tenses up or like all of a sudden your eyes bug out, they'll notice. So really work on how you're going to react if they come to you with something that you might find shocking. Again, be upfront about your boundaries, be respectful, answer their questions as best as you can, And if you don't know the answer to something, be honest with them and tell them that. That's so important, and they really appreciate honesty and transparency. But working with survivors specifically, there's a few things to keep in mind. Again, this is just a little chart of do's and don'ts. So the first thing, as we talked about, is being aware of your nonverbals and your body language, and to not appear judgmental. Acknowledge that you understand that their options aren't ideal, and offer them suggestions, even though they understand you may not like any of them. But things we try not to do is give them unwanted advice. If they're not coming to you saying, so I'll give a better example. If they come to you saying, hey, I need condoms or birth control or lubrication for the sex acts I'm doing, what you can do is say, okay, great. Here's where you can go get these contraceptives. And here's the phone number for Planned Parenthood so you can get checked for STIs. Not, well, I really think you should not be doing that. They didn't come to you for advice. They didn't come to you for your suggestions. They came to you for resources to do what they're going to do in a safe manner. So offer them the services, and then understand that they may say no, and then that's okay. They may not be ready to accept that help in that moment. And then you have to acknowledge that. It's not a reflection of the work you're doing as a professional. It's just a reflection of where they're at in that moment. The biggest thing is to not make promises you can't keep. If you tell a young person you're going to do something for them, especially a young person who's experienced trauma, please make sure you can do it. If you're not sure if you can do it, be honest with them. Don't make promises that you can't keep. Validate how they're feeling. Never disregard their feelings, because typically every person in their life has not cared about their feelings and it has taken away their choices. So validating their feelings and giving them options and choices and respecting the decisions they make, even if you don't agree with them, is essential to working with these young people. So these are a lot of the questions we get. So what do we do if a youth is in immediate danger? So these are tricky things. One of the things, I'm not sure if you guys are mandated reporters, but if the young person is a minor and the person who is their trafficker is the person who is legally responsible for them, you would call in a report to the statewide central registry for abuse and neglect, just as you would if there was physical or sexual abuse. If that person is not the person legally responsible for them, so it's not their parent or guardian, you just want to document and offer them help and services best way you can. If they don't identify as being a victim, which is very typical, that's okay. They're not there yet, and that takes a long time and a lot of counseling and a lot of help, which is fine. So you have to, again, meet them where they're at. So just having conversations with them about consent and healthy relationships and what that looks like, and giving them choices and options rather that are helping meet the needs that their trafficker is meeting, is the best way. If they're upset by something you said, apologize for hurting their feelings. You wouldn't think that would be so hard to do, but it really is. I mean, we're adults, and often we feel like we should be the experts, and we are not. So if you hurt someone's feelings, or you upset the young person, simply just apologize and say, I'll try to do better next time. So I want to talk real quickly about our Safe Harbor New York program and what we do. So every county in New York State, including St. Regis, as well as all of the boroughs of New York City, have a Safe Harbor program. And what that looks like is a system level approach that works with youth serving systems, including child welfare, our runaway and homeless youth programs, probation, PINs, our youth bureaus, as well as other folks in their counties who choose to be involved. And that may look like school social workers, It may look like mental health professionals. It may be law enforcement. Work together to create a pathway to services in their county to help young people who are at risk or who are survivors of trafficking. So what we do at OCFS is we support the counties in developing their pathway to identifying these young people and then helping meet their needs. Why do we do this? By working together, we can create a more effective and efficient response to young people and help work with them to make them more aware of their vulnerabilities. We do programs such as training, both to young people and professionals in the counties, as well as we participate in statewide trainings and nationwide trainings. So this is just a general overview of folks who may make up a county's critical team and a MDT team. So the young person in the family is always at the core, and then we offer a variety of services. And it might be that they need housing. It might be that they need preventive services through foster care. It might need victim services as the parent or guardian is also a survivor themselves. It might be working with law enforcement to put some people behind bars who need to be. It might be working with the juvenile justice system. They do things like mapping their assets. What do we have in the county and who do we have in the county who's willing to do this work? And where are we missing opportunities for training and technical assistance? And then they go out and give that training. It is required by Aaron's Law that schools offer training about child sex abuse every year in their curriculum, and that does involve training on trafficking. Now, I know what many people are thinking is teaching elementary school children about trafficking seems a little absurd. We are not necessarily going into like a second grade classroom and teaching them about trafficking. What we are teaching them about is positive self-esteem, making good choices, good touch, bad touch. Obviously, the curriculum changes as the young people get older. And then we talk more about the specifics. And by we, I mean my county partners. They create standardized tools. All young people who touch an OCFS serving system, meaning juvenile justice, PINS, our child welfare system, are required to be screened for trafficking at a variety of stages throughout the life of the case. And then if it's determined that they are either at risk or have been a survivor, then we offer services based on what the need is at that moment. Our counties do public awareness, so they create bus ads, radio ads, pamphlets. They may attend a community event and have a table. They do other events in the community for Trafficking Awareness Month. They really do a lot to make people really understand that this can happen anywhere and everywhere. And as we talked about, they create service pathways and we collect data. And this is just a map. And actually, I'm happy to say that as of 2021, and this needs to be updated, we're waiting for ITS to update it. All of our counties are purple, which means every county is at full funding for Safe Harbor as of late. And every county has a program through their local Department of Social Services. So that's very exciting news. We took a big hit in 2020, so we were really thrilled for 2021 and 2022 to be back at full funding thanks to the support of our commissioner as well as our local governments. And thank you so much for being here and being willing and open to learning. My email and our general human trafficking email are at the bottom, as well as my phone number. If you come across a situation that's tricky or you'd like further information, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. The staff at OASAS, we have worked with collaboratively for the last couple of years, and it's been a wonderful working relationship. So they know how to reach us at OCFS. And I thank you all so much for your time today, and best of luck.
I want to thank our presenter for today's program. I hope you all find it useful while assisting clients in needs of services. Your feedback is important to us. It helps us know if we're meeting your educational goals and expectations. Once you've viewed the presentation in its entirety and completed the quiz, please follow directions to access the SurveyMonkey website. take a moment to complete the evaluation, including any suggestions for future topics for Learning Thursdays. Once again, thank you for joining us and keep up the good work.